Good evening, everyone. Good evening. My name is Dennis Mugaa, and welcome to Cheche Bookshop. And today we have a discussion with the author Akbar Hussain, and he prefers to be called Aki. So his book is available for 1,500. Today the book we'll be discussing is Truth is a Flightless Bird. So welcome to our discussion. It is my pleasure to facilitate it, and I'm thankful for you all being here. So we'll begin with Akbar introducing himself, and then we can move from there. Akbar.
Okay, thank you very much, Dennis, and thank you, Ubex and Cheche, for hosting us and convening us, and for all of you for coming on a Friday night in this day and age, full of amusements and distractions. Really grateful and happy. So I'm the author of this novel, which is set right here in this city, a city that I love, flawed as it is, beautiful as it is, and it's my, I call it a brutal love letter to Nairobi, a place where we lived with my family for almost 9 years. We had 2 children here. I'm also an entrepreneur. So I have a business here as well, and so I'm lucky enough to get to travel here quite frequently. I think that's at the right altitude, more or less?
Yeah, that's
okay.
more or less. Yeah.
All right, perfect.
Yeah, so we'd like to start with a brief reading for the book, so that we can get into the flavor of the book and to read it in Aki's voice as well, to hear it in his voice.
Chapter 1 of Truth is a Flightless Bird. Nice traveled light. No carry-on other than her wig of chestnut ringlets and her battered purse, and the 1/4 kilo of bespoke narcotics. This short flight to Nairobi had left her dry-mouthed. Biting her lower lip, she thought about the dozen drug packets, each as big as a thumbnail, and painstakingly coated in red candle wax, in her belly. She could still taste the acidic tinge of the orange juice she had washed them down with. She stifled a gag. Her scalp tingled under the wig as the humid air poured into the aircraft cabin. It had been a spontaneous thing, the wig, but now she was glad for it. It made her feel jaunty, in control, and it was one more layer of camouflage. The seatbelt signs pinged off, and passengers began opening the overhead compartments. With the sound, Nice felt she had met another milestone in her trip, and she lapsed into an expressionless good humor, even allowing herself a languorous rub of her tummy, without self-consciousness or hurriedness, as pregnant women are wont to do. A bearded man in the aisle seat on her left stood up, knocking Nice's reading glasses with his elbow. "Sorry." She straightened the glasses and gave her neighbor a half smile. She was getting useful insights from her debilitating morning sickness. For one, it focused the mind on important things. And the important thing now was for Nice to not vomit into this man's lap, to get off the plane into the cool Nairobi evening. She stood down the aisle to look towards the exit. She took a pained breath, watching the harried parents, the mewling infant, the cowled and bird-boned Somali women, and the pinstriped businessmen exhaling self-importance in the cloistered cabin. The bearded man gestured shyly at Nice with his hand, cupping what seemed to be an invisible offering. This perplexed Nice, until she thought to fumble at her nose. Her nostril bled onto her upper lip, unseen, unfelt. Ruffled, she turned away to her shuttered window. She fumbled for a sharp-smelling towelette. The skin around her nostril burned as she dabbed at it. She opened the shutter of her window and watched the bearded man in the plastic reflection, only turning to exit the plane when his wavy ghost had entered the aisle, turning to take one last look at her. Under the harsh lighting of the arrivals hall, Nice caught sight of herself in a mirrored wall, a wispy, feminine frame under a fashionable head of hair. Aid worker, smuggler, time bomb. The gaunt face tightened, and she leaned forward, resting her hands on denim knees. She seemed to herself unworthy of such terms as mother or pregnant. Those were for other people, pushing strollers in sun-dappled suburbs. The dizziness passed. Nice turned to enter the immigration line, bumping as she did so into an unseen person behind her. "Sorry." The tall policeman looked bemused and smiled, but only with his mouth. His teeth were small and gleamed under the fluorescence. "Hakuna shida, are you okay?" He seemed to be studying her face closely, as if to recall her or match her to some profile. Nice took in his neat potbelly, his shiny belt buckle bearing a trident, and the unreadable eyes. She nodded and apologized again, longing to meld into the queue. She turned to leave. "Excuse me," came the policeman's firm voice, more insistent now as she risked another step away from him. "Excuse me, madam." Nice stopped and turned back with what she hoped were also unreadable eyes. She forced herself to walk several steps in the policeman's direction and looked directly into his eyes. The policeman withdrew from under his arm a hidebound cane and gestured with its bulbous brass top at her face. They stood under the humming tube lights. "Here, here!" He stabbed at the air with the cane towards her face. Nice, feeling stupid and alarmed, dabbed at the nosebleed with the back of her hand. "Sorry, I'm okay. Where's the washroom, please?" The brass head levitated over and beyond Nice's left shoulder, hovering at her earlobe. Nice nodded in thanks and turned to walk away, not too quickly, towards the sign for the toilets. "Madam, here!" The policeman handed Nice a handkerchief of white linen, sharply creased. The handkerchief smelt damp, yet Nice desperately wanted to press it to her bleeding nose for the dignity it would afford her. The policeman nodded his assent to the unspoken question. Prior to her pregnancy and the astonishing morning sickness which had ensued, Nice would never have soiled a stranger's handkerchief with her bodily fluids. Now she inhaled the dank scent of the cotton cloth, feeling it absorb her stubborn blood. "I'm sorry for the mess." Nice walked to the washroom. She was not frightened yet. Once inside, she placed her purse on the wet countertop and her glasses into the purse. Her scalp itched. She laved cold water onto her face and felt a measure of relief from the nausea, the dizziness, the anxiety. More water, each evolution giving her more assurance. She placed a hand on the wig, readjusted it. "Are you sure you're okay?" The policeman's voice was conversational, yet deafening in the sanctity of the empty washroom. A chilling brazenness to his posture, standing as he was inside the ladies' washroom studying her. He smiled, as though some difficult equation had unclicked within him. The door shut behind him. They were alone. Nice's mouth grew dry once more. Yes, thanks." Anxious to fill the void, she added, "I'm sorry about your handkerchief." "I like the wig, very realistic." He seemed to relax in the knowledge that he'd found what he was seeking. "You come to Kenya often?" He seemed utterly unconcerned about his trespassing into the women's washroom, that someone could walk in any moment. It was as if he'd claimed the entire airport as a private office. "Yes, for work." Nice consciously checked herself from volunteering any information. Beautiful country. "For some it is. But you seem unwell. Should we go to the medical evaluation tent?" Oh no. Nice ran a finger under her nose to ensure the bleeding had stopped, and then stopped herself. "Really, nothing serious. Just need some fresh air. I've just come in from Mogadishu." The policeman took a few mincing steps across the black and white tile floor and stood shoulder to shoulder with Nice, speaking at her reflection in the mirror. "Mogadishu? Lovely place." He said this with the same void between the smiling mouth and the sleepy cunning of his eyes. Nice felt immediate regret at having disclosed her port of departure, but then she reasoned there were only 2 flights that had recently arrived, so it would have been easy for the policeman to figure it out, had he been so inclined. He did not seem to be so inclined. "I find airports disconcerting. Too many people. So easy to miss the one you seek." Nice blinked over the tap. He continued, "I feel I could know you better, given time." He tore a tissue from the plastic dispenser and absent-mindedly polished the belt buckle with it, never breaking eye contact with Nice's reflection in the mirror. Tube-lit seconds passed. The policeman turned his face to Nice, came in close, seemed about to say something. She felt his warm, even breath, saw the small incisors gleaming. Before either could speak, the door to the washroom clanged open, and through it crashed a large woman in a flower-patterned garment, swinging plastic duty-free bags. Without words, utterly unperturbed, the policeman turned toward the newly arrived woman. He walked towards her, leaned in, and took one of the bags from her hand. He peered into the yellow plastic bag and withdrew a bottle of whiskey, still in its cylindrical case. Removing the bottle, breaking its seal, the policeman inhaled deeply of the caramel-covered liquid. He handed the open bottle back to the woman. Police business. With a barely perceptible nod, he left the ladies' washroom. At the sink, under the gaping look of the duty-free woman, Nice tore some tissues from the dispenser, then withdrew to a stall to gather herself. She fished about in her purse and withdrew the small brown envelope containing emetic pills which would induce a quick and painful vomiting. But losing those precious red bullets would mean the end of her mission, which in turn would bring consequences to herself and her unborn baby, Pendo. She thought of Duncan, who was no doubt waiting for her in the arrivals parking lot. Had she made a mistake, asking him to come, involving him unwittingly in this scheme? Nice considered the handwritten note of confession hidden in her bra and took it out. Another route of escape, however catastrophic. Sitting on the toilet seat, Nice saw a tear land on a black tile. She had not felt her own tear roll down her cheek, and this gave her some resolve. To go forward was, if she played her cards right, to get free from all that haunted her, and the best way to save her baby. Her child would not pay for her mother's life choices. Nice ran her palms over her face. She was wasting time in this bathroom. She stuffed the pills back in the purse. She waited until the washroom was empty, washed her face once more, and walked out into the terminal. Inhaled the air-conditioned air, feeling it pass over her still dry nasal passage. The policeman was nowhere to be seen. She filled out the arrival card, stepped into the queue, preparing all the while to resume, if necessary, the stilted interaction with the cop. Having gotten her passport stamp, she saw him. He was standing with his back to her now, near the baggage reclaim. Screwing up her courage, she walked up to him, touched the epaulette on his shoulder, and handed him back the handkerchief, spotted now with her scarlet blood. Thank you again. The policeman took the handkerchief unsqueamishly, tucking it into his trouser pocket. They walked together towards the exit, the clamoring taxi drivers. The automatic sliding doors hissed open. In the cool, damp air, the policeman stopped. Nice looked up into his face, tried to guess past those eyes, and then awkwardly stuck out her hand. The policeman shook it, maintaining eye contact. The handshake seemed to last a long time. With his free hand, the cop brought forth the handkerchief from his trouser pocket and held the rubied stain to his mouth. Between the startling sharp teeth, Nice saw the dart of a vivid pink tongue. See you again. Soon, perhaps, the man lisped behind the fabric. Safari Njema. Nice stumbled away from him into the waiting throng. She scanned the crowds, standing on tiptoes. Duncan had to be here. He was never late. Then she was conscious that the policeman could still be watching her, seeing who had come to pick her up. A white man in a collarino? That would only draw more attention. She shouldered her way deeper into the bodies, tobacco body odor mixing with the damp air. There, beyond the drop-off lane, in a pool of yellowed sodium lights, Duncan was jogging towards the terminal, checking his wristwatch. She allowed herself a sigh of relief, and, in the same instant, turned to see if the policeman still watched her. He stood where they had parted, at the exit of the terminal, arms crossed over his chest, eyeing the crowd in a professional manner. Could he see her? Was he looking for her? Either way, she had to be sure, to get out of his line of sight. There, behind some scaffolding, was a series of concrete blocks, effectively hidden from the terminal's exit. A billboard of President Obama, grinning, stood above, like a beacon of hope. Straightening her wig, she made her way behind the terminal. Rain fell from the gunmetal sky. End of chapter 1.
So you're a lawyer and also you're an entrepreneur. So could you please tell us how you came now to start writing fiction? Like how was that process for you? And did you have to abandon your previous careers for a while and then to come back now into to start writing?
Well, I always wanted to be a writer, and then we moved here, and I took a year off because our firstborn was very young to spend time with her before I started working, and I was poking around with a few projects, but I never really got a long form, 70, 80,000 word project off the ground. And then, it was just such a exciting time, I had so many things that I was seeing and experiencing, moving here for the first time and living here, that I started just writing initially just a series of totally disconnected, just observations.
Yeah.
And I had the obligatory blog, which I took down, etc. But it was never really pieced together.
Yeah.
But then, I had an arc of what I wanted, and I wanted a novel which was, to use the term that we talked about earlier, writing back, right? Yeah. So turning a lot of the narratives that we see on screen and in books on its head. Yeah. And all the characters who are not Kenyan are wandering through the Kenyan character story. Yeah. And that's really what I wanted. Yeah. And I thought that would be a cool take on it. And I think it's the golden age for storytelling, and I think we all want to see ourselves on the page and on the stage. So basically the opposite of an English patient or a constant gardener. It's the exact inverse of that. And that was sort of my big vision for the story that I wanted to tell. Yeah. How I wanted to tell it, that was all, discovery along the process. Okay,
that's very interesting. And how did the inspiration for the novel, for the story come about?
For me, it doesn't work like that. Yeah. It's never like, I'm walking my dog and I'm like, oh, I gotta get a notebook right away. Yeah. It's more an accretion and a series of thought cycles and iterations and a lot of failure and a lot of rewriting and a lot of, I just spent, 60 hours on that and I have to throw it out. There's a lot of that going on, stuff that doesn't work. Yeah. And I think I had to, the rewriting was very, very painful and very, very tricky, I thought. Yeah. I thought I had a decent story, but I think the first 5 endings that I came up with were like some Shakespeare play where everyone dies, everyone's dying. And the agent and the publisher were like, well, that's not very satisfying. And I think you've betrayed your promise to the reader who's committed so many pages. To have everyone killed off is not a good way to do it. So please go back and think about some other more satisfying way where you can look your reader in the eye and thank them and hopefully give them some satisfying. So that was also quite humbling. I couldn't kill everyone off, which was my first instinct. And I wanted them to suffer a lot. Actually, some of these characters made me suffer a lot. So so I was trying to dish it out to them a little bit. And then lastly, I definitely wanted Nairobi to be a character. This is not a character, and this is a beef that I have with the television people, and we'll come to that, I'm sure, but they're like, oh, would it be okay if we did it in Johannesburg? I'm like, have you read the book? Because it's supposed to be, I get it, the realities and the economics of television, I get it, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying the book itself, Nairobi is a character. Yeah. It's like saying, it should not, my thing to my test for success, one of the tests for success was, would this story work anywhere but Nairobi? Yeah. And if so, what can I change to make that true? And that was constantly like my North Star. And that's what I meant about it. It's a brutal love letter to a very specific time, a very specific place. Yeah. It's very zeitgeisty. It's actually the moment, we were living here when Obama was visiting. Yeah. And that was also, I'm not into politics, I don't like all that. But I felt like I was willy-nilly part of a historical moment. And I didn't really get why people were so excited about it. But so that is a big backdrop of the story. And I hope we can talk a little bit about that as well. But sorry, that's a very rambling answer to a very good question.
It's fine. Yeah, I was just actually going to go into the characters because I would like you to speak up because in the first chapter we get introduced to Nice, but then as we go along there, we find an American pastor like Duncan who is in the country, and also Shiro and Too Good, who is also Somali. Like, how did these characters come about, and what was your inspiration for them? Just generally how they came about.
Okay. Well, I think it was a lot of stumbling around in the dark. Yeah. I think there are people in the audience who know my spouse, and Nice is roughly based on my spouse. She doesn't do drug smuggling and all, but I promise you that. Yeah. But she did work a lot. She lived in Nairobi and did the commute to Mogadishu. Yeah. She is Canadian. She's nice, etc. So and Duncan is also based on someone that I knew very well here, whose permission I had to sort of shadow them, and they belong to a very like a development work type church. and he also had misgivings about some of the religiosity packaging of and so I thought that was a very interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
And so I did check out his operations quite a lot, with his permission.
Yeah.
And I thought that was that was almost enough to kickstart the story.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, obviously you want to add some spice and some drama, so that's what happens next.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So you speak a lot about Nairobi and also Kenya. So I was wondering why did you choose Kenya as a setting of the book? And could you share your thoughts on the philosophy of place, and also given the time we're in and the discussions that people have around who has a right to tell a certain story. Well, of course, you've lived here for a significant period of time, but at the same time, given that you are not born here, what made you write a story which is Kenyan, or rather, yes.
It's a good question. The short answer is that I love Nairobi and I love Kenya.
Yeah.
And it's the first place I've lived, and I've lived all over the world where the identity is so fluid. Maybe that's a function of a socioeconomic privilege as well. I'm totally conceding that.
Yeah.
But, people are very welcoming and very open. Everywhere else you live, people are like, well, where are you really from? What are you? And you're like, oh, gosh, how annoying. Yeah. And here they're like, whatever. And I found that really light. And I didn't even realize how heavy the burden of how I look and how I speak was. All this time I've been carrying this heavy backpack, and I'm like, oh gosh, it's really heavy. And I could just shed it here. And I'd never experienced that before. So that was really cool for me personally. Then I'd also never lived cheek by jowl with so much inequality. It was just baffling to me. And that's again a function of my dissonance with my privilege that I have, and yet how upbeat and cheerful and cool and sympathetic everyone was. I found that really, I didn't know what to make of it. Frankly, I was a bit confused. And then lastly, obviously, there's the physical beauty for which Kenya is, world famous, which also kind of, I'm back after several months, and I still find it, the first 40 hours, a bit irreal to me, how ridiculously beautiful everything is. And so it's kind of a combination of those three things. Yeah. And then, we also, I knew someone who was a detective on a vice squad.
Oh, wow.
And so we did some research, and I went on some ride-alongs. I don't know what they're called. And I asked the detective, I said, what should I do to prepare for this? Because we're going to places where probably I won't do very well, right? I won't last very long without you. So what should I do? He's like, wear comfortable shoes. That's it. I was like, okay, all right.
Did you get in danger in this?
No, it was all he was more like, the real fun part was we rode around some pretty difficult parts of the city, obviously. And then afterwards we went for Nyamachoma. And then he started telling me stories, almost like ballads, the broken-hearted gangster, and all those like a Mexican love ballad. And at one point, and he was quite drunk, actually, I would say. He reached back like this, and he was like, oh, and he put a huge revolver on the table, and I was like, okay, cool. I think that concludes the evening. I think I've gotten all the information I need. But it was, it was very, very sobering. It's and I think I wanted to capture that as well. Not make it rose-tinted or romantic. It's not. It's very dehumanizing to live like that, and so I wanted to capture some of that as well.
Oh yeah. So, because how did you navigate the theme of your novel, or rather, what you're trying to pass along with? Because of course, there's a whole discussion on. I think there's an essay by Binyavanga about how to write about Africa. So, how did you ensure not to be stereotypical, at the same time being honest to your work?
Also a nice question. I think I did it two ways. One was, for a long time, I didn't come up with this title until quite late, very late in the process. The working title on my computer was "Good People Doing Bad Things for Good Reasons." That's my working title on the version 1, version 10, version 100, whatever. But that's what I wanted to capture. Is it's what we think as ethical or polite behavior is a function of choice, which is often a function of socioeconomic positioning. So I've never been in a position where I had to steal food from a grocery store or trample someone out of the way to get out of a burning building. I don't know how I'd conduct myself because I've never been tested in that fashion, right? And that's what I wanted to experiment. And that's what I was trying to make, like Nairobi, this crucible or this Petri dish, and then drop these different creatures into the Petri dish and see how they interact. And their identity was ultimately irrelevant because I'd given them certain attributes, and so it's like the Tom and Jerry cartoons. They're very popular. Why are they very popular? Because the writers, it looks very crude and silly and cartoonish, but the writers had very sophisticated attributes for each character. Each character will only do these things. And that's what makes it a timeless classic, actually. That's why our kids watch it today, even though it was written in the 50s. And so I was kind of inspired by the Tom and Jerry school of where you get these different, you get a cat, you get a mouse or whatever it is, and you sort of drop them. And they fight over a piece of cheese or whatever. That's really what I was shooting for, but in a very different context, obviously. But craft-wise, that's really what I was getting at. So that's one way. Sorry, and then second part to your question is there was a lot of, there were 3 rounds of sensitivity readership because I did not want to misappropriate or misrepresent or do anything silly or insulting or casual. So there was different people, 2 Kenyan people and a Nigerian person who read it just to see, who are you to tell the story? And I had that debate, before we agreed to this. And ultimately, my answer to that question, which you posed also, which I haven't really answered, is I think it'd be a sad and impoverished world in which only people who are in wheelchairs can write about people in wheelchairs, or people who wear glasses can write about people with glasses. That's not the way it is. I'm not telling all stories. This is a singular story, and it's a very it's one man's take on it, and I think that's healthy and good, provided I'm true and authentic, and I don't try and take anything from anyone or misrepresent. I can sleep quite soundly at night.
Okay, thank you. And then I think there's a section in the book which takes place in Somalia, just a bit. I was wondering, because you've lived in Kenya, did you have to go to Somalia for that part of the research, or? No,
my wife used to go there for work, and so she lived on this army base, which I'd never heard stories like that. So that was that, and then I also I just read about it, Google, and spoke to Somali people, and I didn't know that there was a beautiful beach there, and there was a beautiful hotel on the beach. And that kind of was a weird juxtaposition to me, because I only read about Somalia in the newspaper, and it's never a beautiful hotel on a beautiful beach. It's always, terrible drama. And so I wanted to have that juxtaposition as well, or that contrast.
Oh, interesting. Thank you. And so your book is set against the backdrop of President Obama coming. And of course, I think in reality when he came, the whole city was cleaned up, like everything was so nice, to say the least. But I was wondering, in your book, Obama doesn't come out a lot, or rather I think it's only a speech where we see him. And yet from his presence is sort of felt, from the beginning. So why did you make it in the background, Obama being in the background?
Yeah, I mean, why? Because I feel like there is no Obama, right? I mean, it's a bit of that's the whole point of someone like that. No one's coming to save you. He's not going to save you. He's gone. And I think that was what I wanted. That was the opposite of what I wanted. Even though he happens to be black or biracial or whatever, that would just be falling into the savior thing. If he comes and he saves the day and he stops the bullet, and no, that's not the way. That's not what's happening in the story. I don't know who he is, but he's a professional politician. Therefore, I'm assuming he's a very ruthless individual who happens to speak very nicely. That's what I've assumed. I don't know anything about him, right? But you don't get to be president of the USA without stabbing a few people in the neck, in my opinion, anyway. And so that's not politics. That's just a fact. That's not. And so I don't think he's anyone's hero or anyone's savior. And I think that's kind of the whole point. Is like once you understand. The only way you're going to get out of this foxhole is you yourself getting out of the foxhole. No one's coming to get you. There's no cavalry. And so even in the beginning, you see in that first chapter, he talks about like a beacon of hope. That's false, and it's a hollow promise. And there's a joke one of the characters says, like when they're cleaning up making a Potemkin village of beautiful bylanes and boulevards and all, and getting all the homeless people and the mentally ill like out of the way so he can have he calls it Obamacare. Like that's Obamacare. It's like tidying up the city to make sure that, and one of my favorite characters is a young Kenyan policewoman. She even says, you have to be your own Obama.
Yeah.
You got to save yourself. You got to be your own beacon of hope. And that's the only way I can see, having lived, and seen a thing or two, no one's going to save you.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So we find in the book different ways in which people define settling in a place. So we see Duncan, an American pastor. He lives a rather expatriate kind of life, or rather he thinks of himself as an expatriate. But then against that, we also see Shiro, who has been to America. I think she was deported later on. But then when she was there, or rather when she's speaking about her experience there, she defines herself as an immigrant. She lived in a very poor neighborhood, rough as well. But there's this dichotomy where we find that there are still migrants in different countries, but then they still live, they define themselves very differently. Because when someone says they're an expatriate, you imagine this very glamorous lifestyle. And an immigrant is, of course, the opposite side, where you're seen as someone other, to put it that way. So I was wondering, how do these terminologies play about, not just in your book, but like how you see life as itself?
Yeah, I definitely wanted to have that super stark contrast. And I think Duncan is an interesting character because he's already got misgivings about his role and his capacity to help. He has theological training. That's it. No other training. He's not a doctor. He's not an engineer. He can't dig a ditch. He can't help you do your taxes. He can't put IKEA furniture together. The guy can't do anything other than and he realizes those skills are only useful to a point. And there's an early chapter, I think you and I talked about it, where he feels that some of this is like, it's a bit like voodoo, he's just saying words and hoping that bad stuff goes away. And it's starting to feel more and more hollow. And it's starting to feel like, was I only hired because I'm a white guy? And it feels very heavy for him. And he's got a very capable and qualified Nigerian lieutenant who effectively runs these operations for him. And he feels intensely insecure because he knows that without that person, this whole thing is gonna, they distribute food and clothing to very difficult parts of the city. He has no skills to contribute to that. And on top of that, he's starting to feel like, these magic words that he has are like only so good as, it's a bit of a placebo. And I think yet, as an expat, he gets a lot of regard and a lot of benefit of the doubt and a lot of privilege. And I wanted to contrast that with when Shiro goes to America. She doesn't want to go, right? It's her kid who wants to go. And she does it to sort of cater to him. And she ends up, a hairdresser in Bushwick, Brooklyn, which if you know is there's nice parts of it now, but there's also terrible parts of it. And she was living in not a gentrified part. And, there's gunshots, there's violence. It's not, it's like, America, there's many Americas. It's like a buffet, right? You get one America if you're depends on who you are. And same thing here, but even more so because the middle class is so, it's such a nascent thing. And so I definitely wanted to explore those themes. And my friend, upon whom the Duncan character is based, was very self-aware, I would say, and wise about some of these things. And not at all threatened to ventilate them and talk about them. And a lesser person, I think, would be very verklempt and very no, that's extremely threatening to who I am and how I've built my life. And I don't want to talk about that. And so I'm lucky to have a friend like that who was willing to share some of those things with me.
Okay, wow, thank you. Also, I was wondering, given that your book now is, or rather when I read it, I was like, oh, this is crime fiction. And has it helped you reach a wide audience as opposed to literary fiction? Or do you see a difference between literary fiction and crime fiction? Or how do you organize genres when you're writing? Do you think about them?
Okay, I'm going to do the politician now and just give my canned rant rather than answer your question, because I feel this is a real hot button issue for me, which is that I was astounded. This is my first book, by the way. I was astounded as an entrepreneur how little the person who's actually writing the book is valued in the overall ecosystem. Like where art meets commerce, like you're done as the producer. And so that's something that's just a footnote to the answer, by the way, which I find totally absurd. And I intend to make it, in my next venture, I'm going to change that. I'm going to make some sort of story factory, or I don't know what I'm going to call it, but like the creator is going to have the stage and the mic. It's not going to be some person in a suit editing it afterwards. No, we'll talk about that down the road. So that's one thing. The second thing is I'm astounded, again, that this industry is so hidebound and out of date and mode, that there's still this baffling dichotomy between what's literary and what's genre, right? And I totally underestimated that. I was trying to write a book that hopefully sells in airports and train stations and, oh, you're going to Kenya, you should read this book. Like I wanted that vibe. And I wanted this, I wanted it to be like a TV script, and hopefully we'll get to that. But I was shocked at the amount of feedback that I got saying that, oh, it's commercial fiction and genre and a thriller and a crime thriller, even worse, set in Africa, even worse, and therefore it has no literary merit and no anthropological merit. It cannot tell you anything about how people live because it's a crime thriller. And I found that completely regressive and astonishing. And maybe I was very naive, but I think, I've read a lot of books of different color. I learned something from all of them, and yet a lot of people were like in the industry were like, well, no, it's got no merit because it's it's like junk food. It's got it's got calories, but you can't feed yourself off of it. And I found that, I was really baffled, head scratching. So,
is there a way that you dealt with that, or are you now going to deal with it in your next book?
Well, I didn't deal with it per se. I write the way I write. It's it's like you speak the way you speak, or you dress the way you dress. It's very hard to do something else without coming across affected. Right? And so it's just better to whatever you're comfortable wearing or identifying as, just be it. And so but I think my natural voice is sort of a marriage between it's quick, there's stuff happening, but hopefully there's also I do love language, and I do love I think the English language is uniquely like it's like a bird that steals from other people. It's like it's fun to write in. And that's I made a choice to write in English, and I think because it's a neat language. And so I think I think it is hopefully on the literary side of it. And if you get to this, I don't want to do any spoilers, but it does become there is sort of a Kenyan character with a lot of agency, a very powerful woman, and she does have a tinge of magic realism to her. And what I was trying to do was make the foreground really factual and city-based, and the background really surreal and bizarre, and sort of bring it into focus, but later. So if I've done my job well, like weird stuff is going to start happening without you noticing it. So it'll be a world where we're talking, and then suddenly I start levitating, and you're like, oh, cool, that's part of the story. And that's when I feel like I've done my job well, and that's when I had the most fun with it. And when I put away all those things, literary, will it get published? Will anyone read this? I don't care. I'm writing a fun story. I'm the director. I'm the producer. I'm the TV star. I'm doing all of it. I'm the lighting guy. And that was when I started really when you can crank up the weird, in the back third of it, I think, is when you're like, wait, what? That's when I started having fun with it, when I abandoned all that. But then when the art met commerce, that's when I was like, oh, maybe I should have done it differently. But,
Okay. And how is it now going into the market? Like, how is it now when you're looking for your publisher? How is the process like?
There's a lot of people telling you your baby's ugly. So that's never fun. But I think I needed it. In fairness, all the feedback was honestly. I'm not just saying this because it did get published. I do believe that it was not ready. I had to do a lot of work on it, and even the publisher. So the agent and I didn't see eye to eye, and there was a lot of things where I felt like she wasn't really doing the best job of representing the heart of the novel. Or maybe she didn't see it or she didn't believe in it. That's fair also. But the publisher was very editorially minded, and is a real I mean, a lion of letters, I would say, honestly. And he had a lot of suggestions, which initially, as a first-time artist, as a first-time writer, it's scary because I'm old enough to have good taste. Like, I know what good writing looks like and feels like, but I don't have the skill set to do it consistently.
Yeah.
And yet I don't know why I'm failing to do it.
Yeah.
So I read it back and I'm like, that's terrible. Why is it terrible? I don't know. I have no idea. And so you have that moment where your skill set and your tastes are not aligned.
Yeah.
And you just can't produce quality writing. And he had a very firm, I'll use that word, but also, you know, he took me by the hand and was like, listen, this is why it sucks. This is why it's not ringing true. And you might want to think about that. And then he also had some very pointed things about, like, well, you should move this pillar and put that light over there. And again, I was very threatened by that initially, because I was like, what do you mean? You know, it's perfect the way it is. But it wasn't, and it's not still, and that's fine. But I think, I'll stop there because I feel like I can go on for a while. But
it was interesting. So I saw that your book was optioned and it's supposed to be, it's soon to be a major television series. Would you mind speaking about that a bit?
Absolutely. So, I mean, to be clear, and so as I don't misrepresent, an option, empirically, most options do not get made. So let's be very clear on that. So I want to be very authentic here. But again, I think same thing. I think we've got a producer who is Nigerian English, so they have their own TV house, and his brother, I think I can say this publicly, is a big star in the Marvel universe. So he plays, I forget the character's name, but it's like a headline character. Okay, I'm not really big on those movies. But so, and their whole vision for that production house is we want to do really high quality production, like cinematic level production for TV shows, but set out of Pan-Africa. Like, so even though he's in the UK, he spends a lot of time in LA, but he also he has a subsidiary in Nigeria, and they're looking for content across the continent. And they want to staff it, and they want to fund it, and they want to do all of it in-house, vertically integrated, which is totally aligned with the Story Factory that I was talking about earlier. So I really get along with them. I mean, they're in the industry, and it was sheer dumb luck. It's not like I fell on, I can't claim, my publisher was awesome. He made a lot of introductions, and I think they definitely see the book. They get it. And I think we've had some tough debates. I think the nearest celebrity story that we have for the book so far is, I think, someone in Idris Elba's team or entourage or whatever it's called was inquiring whether we could make one of the characters, change the race of one of the characters. And I had no poker face. I was like, yeah, let's do it right away. Let's do it, where do I sign? But it didn't pan out. But that's fine, I'm okay with that. I think signing a TV thing is like dropping your kid in an orphanage. Like, it's a different project. Like, you have no say. Like, I get it, I'm not naive about it. And I think that's what I mean about the amount of rejection and the amount of just no. It's like, being an entrepreneur is basically like, no, is like it's nothing to me. Like, oh no, you don't like it? No worries, see you down the road. Like, that's not fake. I'm not naturally like that. I'm a very sensitive, insecure person, and I had to eat a lot of no sandwiches to get here, and I think that was needed. So, yeah.
Okay. Okay. My final question before I open up to the audience: is there another novel that is forthcoming from you, or a book project?
Yeah. There's a good joke. I think it was Graham Greene who said, like, someone asked him, are you working on something else? And he said, I don't know, I think so. And I think I'm a bit further down the road. I do have a manuscript, and I've tried to, if I imagine a quadrant, I'm trying to put it more literary, and also a bit more, I'm going to be more free with the weird. It's just, I'm not trying to appeal to anyone. So it is set, it's set in northern India. And I was reading this is true, I was reading my grandfather's diary. He was the chief of police in a big province in northern India, like roughly the size of France. That's how big this country is, right? Wow. I mean, and he's responsible. And they had just outlawed widow burning, which is like a really terrible thing, obviously. So widow burning is a ritual, in a religious ritual where if your husband dies, then it's honorable and right for you to jump into a fire to kill yourself, because anything else would bring dishonor on the dojo, if you see my point. So obviously a law was passed to outlaw that. And he was on patrol in such a big province, in a very rural part of the province, where they were just about to kick off one of these ceremonies. And he intervened to stop it. And he was a Muslim, well, he's dead now, but he was a Muslim, and it's a Hindu ritual. And so someone filed a claim that he was being, like, whatever, communal. And so that there ends the non-fictional kernel from which the rest of the story springs. And so it's equal parts, like, I'd say Zorro, because my grandfather was a bit of a, like, it's always embarrassing to me how few freedom fighters are in my family. Like, I feel like if someone invaded my country, I'd be like, I'm not going to learn your language and go to your school. I'm going to fight you tooth and nail. But again, I've never been tested like that. So it's easy for me to sit here with all the privilege I've got and be like, I'll never be a bureaucrat in a colonial. Like, maybe I would. I probably would, in fact. But I'd like to think I wouldn't be. And so that's the other thing I'm tapping into, is like that I found very useful and people don't talk about, is something that causes you shame is a very rich vein for creative endeavors. If it causes you shame, think about it. It is the best place to start a creative project. And that's one thing that doesn't cause me enough shame that I can talk about it here. So it's, you know what I mean? Because other things that cause me a lot of shame that I wouldn't talk about here. But I feel like this is a good one to kick a story off. And so it's this character, and he's very ashamed that he's working in the British police, right? He's wearing a whatever. He's like basically a slave trader, essentially. I mean, you're not doing the right thing, in my opinion. And he thinks his father is also very effete and weak and, eating at the trough of the British or whatever. But it turns out, and so the woman, as she jumps into the fire, curses him and his family. And he's like, whatever. And he does not able to save her. She dies. But then the curse comes to reality. He loses his job. He loses whatever. His dad dies. And then he realizes that he goes to bury his dad. And there's a Muslim tradition that you have to wash the body. And as he does that, he realizes, like the Malvi or whatever, the religious person, the pastor, says, oh, your dad wanted you to have this. And he gives him this thing. And it's a pill, and he takes it, and it's a hallucinogenic, and he gets inducted into the secret society. That's what I mean about cranking up the weird. And the secret society they're like effete, genteel, tea drinking, like aristocrats by day, and they blow up bridges and kill British people at night. And what's the best way to do that is to be a judge or to be a civil engineer. Obviously, no one's going to check you, like a Zorro. Then equal parts like M. Night Shyamalan. And I think that's the arc of the story. But like I said, I'm going to be much more liberal with how weird it is, and I'm totally happy that people think my baby's ugly. Like, no worries. And I've earned a thick skin, so I'm happy with that.
So I would like to say that Aki is available for signing again. You get the book and then he can sign it for you. Finally, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. On a Friday night.
Seriously.
Maybe all of you have plans, but thank you for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you.